Hello and welcome to the CFB version of the Super Show. I'm your host, Walter Waddell, aka Dub Deuce 85, joined as always by my partner in crime, co-host Jake Kuchek. We're going to be talking about the DK and FanDuel main slates for college football, DFS, betting, and prize picks. We also have another special guest because I'm sure you guys are getting tired of just looking at our faces. I mean, Jake's fine, but maybe not mine. I do want to get into a little bit about the promo code that's still happening over at FTN Daily. 50% off your first month subscription, any package there, annual or monthly payment, Night Hoops, NIGHT, HOOPS, 50% off your first month. Very big deal there. Gets you access to pro sports, college sports, esports, anything you can possibly imagine. Optimizers, projections, articles, private shows, everything you could possibly need to be a competitive player. Before we get into the game by game, Jake, let's talk a little bit about last week. It was kind of a weird one. Ended up with some really nice calls, had a couple of not so great calls, but overall I think it was a pretty decent week. How do you feel about that?
Yeah, man. Didn't get anything like my crazy Fernando Mendoza game. So it was unfortunate, unlucky on that stat line call, but we had a pretty good week overall. We had Dylan Johnson on the night slate, and my goodness, that USC defense can just be taken advantage of in every which way. I know we were pretty high on Penix as we usually are, but the run game was what took over. So that was that was a good way to end the night with lots of Dylan Johnson.
For sure. Anytime USC is on the slate, we know we can definitely stack against them at this point. All right, so we're going to do what we always do, which is go game by game, talk about each, give our takes, any core plays from them, a little bit of this, a little bit of that. But we are going to have a special guest come on here to talk about the Michigan-Penn State gang, a super fan of Michigan and somebody that knows that team and program a lot more than us. So we want to welcome this special guest now. Her name is Michelle, putting her through now. Hey, Michelle, how's it going?
Hey, I'm doing well. How are you guys?
Doing well. Excited for this this big slate of college football coming up.
Yeah, should be a great Saturday.
Awesome. Yeah, so basically the thing we like to do here, Michelle, is we just kind of go over a game, talk a little bit about, different aspects, what we think it's going to go like, and any relevant players that we want to look at, maybe use, fade, anything like that. Does look like it's a 4.5 point favorite for Michigan, total of 45. Why don't you just jump right in and tell us about the game?
Sure. So it's interesting to me, first of all, that spread has been closing a little bit. I think when it started, it was at like 5 or maybe even 5.5, and it's gotten a little more narrow, which is a little concerning as a Michigan fan. But I think there are a few interesting things to know about this game. One is this Penn State team was absolutely embarrassed by how badly Michigan ran against them last year. And it's clear that they constructed a defense in response to that. They now have the number one rush defense in the country. That's pretty clear. But Michigan has sort of evolved in spite of that, right? Michigan this year is a lot different than we saw last year. They're passing a lot more. JJ McCarthy's mobility has been a huge factor for this Michigan team. They're really utilizing tight ends very well, which I think influences some of the plays this weekend. So I think Michigan does have a pretty good shot at sort of outdoing what Penn State has been expecting them to do in this game, which has been a very, rush heavy offense with Blake Corum, Donovan Edwards. They've just mixed it up a little bit more. And I think that versatility will give them an edge in this game. And I expect they cover.
Awesome. Do you look at the DFS side at all on that too, or just more?
Yeah, no, I think there are some great value options. I know JJ McCarthy is a pretty expensive pick right now, but I think he's worth it because of his versatility and because he's going to be throwing quite a bit in this game. My favorite play actually is a guy called Samaj Morgan. He is a true freshman at the wide receiver position, and he is absolutely explosive. He's had several touchdowns so far this season. He's sort of overlooked because Roman Wilson has been hitting the end zone a lot, getting a ton of attention as wide receiver number 1. But I would, if you're going to spend a ton on other like sort of big ticket players, I would go with Samaj Morgan. I think you can pick him up right now I just looked at this earlier. Samaj Morgan is available for 3,500. And he's been explosive. Mullings, I think, is a running back from Michigan that is also a really good value. They're using him in a ton of like short down situations. He also finds the end zone quite a bit, though. He's really powerful, but he's picked up yardage on a few explosive plays as well so far this season. He was hurt for a couple games earlier, but he just came back in the game against Purdue, and I think he's really strong. So I would see Samaj Morgan and Mullings as two of some really good value plays that might not be readily apparent if you're just kind of looking, at the games more broadly. I think you might miss those guys, but they're great.
Yeah, that's kind of a hallmark of the show. We like to find these sub 4K low owned receivers that potentially could pop or get a touchdown. So I like that call a lot. I definitely will look into him more for sure. I appreciate you coming on, giving us
the analysis. That's I thought we were just gonna go, all roads to the end zone go through Roman Wilson, but we're digging a little bit deeper than that. I love it.
No, absolutely not. I would say also one more sort of insight there is Donovan Edwards has been used a ton by this Michigan team as a receiver, even though he's technically slotted as a running back. He's really quick. JJ McCarthy really likes him as a target in that respect. And he's actually, I think you can pick him up for less than Blake Corum and Katron Allen and Singleton. So if you're looking for sort of a good value on the running back position, I would go with Donovan Edwards over Corum, Singleton, or Allen.
Yeah, we've been waiting. We're pretty big Edwards fans on the show and been waiting for a week to use him. And he looked pretty good against Purdue. So GPP wise at 5-1, I'm on board with it for sure. I appreciate you coming on, giving us this knowledge about the Michigan game. Why don't you tell people where they can find you on your socials and where you're prevalent at, so they can follow you?
Sure. Mostly I'm on Twitter or X at Michelle K4040. That's probably the best place to find me for all football related things.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you guys so much. Good team.
Thanks for coming on.
All right, that was awesome. I that's getting some fanfare in the chat there. I think that's something that and now I know how to do 3 people at once. So look at that. We're going places. We're evolving here. Exactly. We're going to jump into the next one here. Well, actually, before we move on from Michigan, do you have any plays in that one, like either on the Penn State side as well, that you might be looking at? I love that Morgan call. Like, how I am about these cheap receivers. So
especially if you're gonna use a JJ McCarthy. The obvious pairing is Roman Wilson, and maybe Roman Wilson does the 3 touchdown thing again and you need him. But if you are looking for that like kind of alt build, fade Roman Wilson, but keep JJ McCarthy, he's got to throw the touchdowns to someone. And Edwards, McCarthy, Edwards, Morgan, the Michelle special, that could do a lot of damage.
Yeah, no doubt. And I always got to throw a shout to my man, Colston Loveland, who I was a couple weeks early on him. He had a 3 straight weeks scoring at least 1 touchdown. Kind of went back to the classic 4 for 55 last week against Purdue, but at 490, somebody to definitely look at as well. All right, we're going to move right along here, get into the next game, which I'm going to go with Georgia Tech versus Clemson. Got Clemson as 14.5 point favorites, a 55.5 over under. Now, lately, Georgia Tech games have been fun. They haven't been on the slate very often, but we've been getting some massive fantasy games from Haynes King this year, which I don't think anybody could have possibly predicted from his last couple of seasons being kind of just a guy. But 22 touchdowns on the year, 10 interceptions, 2,300 yards. Also has shown an affinity to be able to run, 545 rushing yards and 5 touchdowns. He's been absolutely phenomenal. Taking him at 8-8 against the Clemson defense might be a little bit of a tougher situation. We saw Clemson really handcuff Garrett Schrader of Syracuse in a similar situation. Schrader came into that game extremely hot, and they just clamped him down. So I would be pretty worried about using King in a game against Clemson on the road. Same goes for any of their running backs. I do really like their receiver room right now between Malik Rutherford, Eric Singleton, and Blaylock, but and Leary to an extent at 3-4. Christian Leary's been seeing a little bit of pop recently. But again, using any of those guys against Clemson seems like a pretty tough situation. I don't think that Georgia Tech's going to get blanked by any means, but I do think we're going to have to be looking for some more safety with this slate, because there is going to be a lot of, I think, like 2.5 to 3x type of scores. I don't know that the slate's going to have a ton of like slate breakers on it, although it might, but I look at this slate and see a lot of safety potential, and I want to just get raw points. So I'm not sure I want to lean too heavy into Georgia Tech. On the Clemson side, Klubnik, I'm pretty much always off of him, although this matchup is fantastic. If there were a spot for him to potentially blow up, this would be it. But I just have this kind of weird rule where I don't roster Cade Klubnik. I just like to roster good players usually. We know Will Shipley was out last week. That led to a call that I have to own for sure. You know, we own the good and the bad here, and I had someone quite upset with me about Phil Maffa. You know, he came out and he got a ridiculous amount of work. I mean, no one could have saw him getting 40 plus touches at all. 186 yards, couple of touchdowns, absolutely blew the doors off of it against a Notre Dame defense that before that has contained just about every other running back. So I certainly whiffed it hard on Maffa. I can admit that. And I would probably fade him again if the situation was run back and we didn't know what we know now. With Shipley coming back into the mix here, likely to play, that's just going to muddy the waters there. I think you have to play they have to use Maffa, obviously, but Shipley's going to get in there and get 10 plus touches as well. Really just going to come a committee backfield, although they both could pan out quite well against this Georgia Tech defense that is very fantasy friendly. So I guess GPP wise, if you want to heat check Maffa at 5.7, you certainly can. But don't be surprised if Shipley ends up being the one that gets most of the touchdowns there. And then when it comes to the receivers, I'm really just looking at our guy, Jake Brittingsteel, the tight end at 4.2. Finally had a down game after 2 straight heavy target games, 8 plus targets in 2 of the last 3. That was against Notre Dame. Look for him to bounce back here against Georgia Tech. I really like him at that 4.2 price point. Don't think he's going to be in my main lineup by any means right now, but I have a lot of GPP options in this matchup that I'm feeling quite good about. And Brittingsteel is just he's not just a showdown play anymore, Jake. We got to definitely consider him here, considering the game against Miami and NC State, in which he looked fantastic and was one of the favorite targets of your guy, Cade Klubnik, for both of those games. So that is the quick and easy version of Clemson, Georgia Tech. Do you have anything you want to add there before we move it right along?
The only other shout that I would have would be Tyler Brown. I mean, we've seen him. We've seen his talent emerge at times. Hasn't been overly consistent, but at only 5K, he's a decent GPP option. And if for whatever reason Georgia Tech sells out to try to stop the run game, whether it's Shipley or Maffa, they saw that many carries going to the running back last week, and they say, hey, we're going to throw 8 men in the box and make Cade Klubnik beat us. Not a bad idea, but it could open things up for Tyler Brown, and he's been pretty explosive when given an opportunity.
Yeah, most definitely. All right, we'll move on here to the Texas Tech versus Kansas game. Texas Tech, it's 3.5-point dogs with the Jayhawks at 62.5 total over there on DraftKings. There are 2 games on this slate, basically, I guess 3, that are over the 59 mark, this being one of them. A lot of intrigue here on both sides. Where's your head at for this particular matchup?
Well, first things first, it is a day that ends in Y, which means that Jalen Daniels is questionable. I don't know that we're going to see any Jalen Daniels. Jason Bean has actually been, better than I would have thought Jason Bean would be. And so I think that has at least taken the pressure off of rushing Jalen Daniels back. That said, if we somehow get a healthy, ready to go Jalen Daniels at 7.6 against Texas Tech, that's amazing for all purposes, and that's a slam dunk. However, just because Jalen Daniels is starting doesn't mean he's healthy, and it's a big risk to take. So I understand if you want to stay away from the Jalen Daniels dance completely, and just find other aspects of this game to participate in. But it is something to be cognizant of. Texas Tech is pretty terrible on defense and can be taken advantage of in every which way. predominantly in the running game, not because they're necessarily worse in the running game, just because it's easier to run than it is to pass. And if you can beat him on the ground, you might as well. So we've seen some reemerging consistency from Devin Neal after, I don't know if he was fighting game script or injury, or just the passing volume was way too high against Oklahoma State. He didn't get the work, but had some pretty good games back to back with 20 plus carries against Oklahoma, against Iowa State. 7-1 Devin Neal is also not something I would shy away from. It's a little higher than we're used to seeing him. He's like a 6'3" to 6'6" guy, but like he deserves to be 7-1 for sure, if not more so. So I'm pretty interested there. If you want to take the discount on Highshaw and go down to 51, less volume, possibly more explosiveness, but I really do like Devin Neal at 7-1. I think that's a very reasonable price that leaves plenty of meat on the bone for him to succeed. And then you get the 4K wide receiver roulette with Arnold, Skinner, Fairchild. Trevor Wilson is banged up, may not get him for this one, so it would at least consolidate the targets a little bit. But we're still just kind of spinning the wheel with which Kansas receiver is going to go off. Likely it is going to be one of them. So if you are doing the MME thing and you want to get Arnold, Skinner, and Fairchild into your builds, sprinkle them evenly. Don't really have a matchup-based take as to which one of them is going to be most successful. I think that's a pretty wide open thing. And they all are going to be very high variance. On the Texas Tech side, I think we're still going to go with Baron Morton. You never really know with Texas Tech. And so, hopefully that we get some clarity there. He has been pretty decent when he's had the opportunity and been healthy. Put up a very strong game against TCU, got the win, so should have all kinds of confidence. And even if we had a fully healthy Texas Tech quarterback room, I think Baron Morton has played well enough to warrant consideration as kind of the top dog. So hopefully we get that clarity too. At 7-1, he's definitely in play. I want a lot of pieces of this game, and so if you were to go Neal on the Kansas side and Baron Morton and a receiver or two on the Texas Tech side, that's not unreasonable. But Taj Brooks, man, Taj Brooks, 31 carries last game against TCU, and both Baron Morton and Taj Brooks had good games. So it's not one of those situations where you got to do one or the other. And it wasn't because Taj Brooks got a lot of work in the passing game. He caught 4 balls for -4 yards. So it's not like he was this dynamo in the passing game and that's how he got there. They just both got there because this is number one, a pretty competent offense. And number two, they have a pretty terrible defense that's keeping the offense running. They've got to get going and try to keep up in just about every game that they're in. So Taj Brooks at 7-7, it's a lot to pay. He's going to get a lot of volume. The backup Valdez got 3 carries in what was a very competitive game against TCU, and I expect this one to be pretty similar. So Taj Brooks is probably my favorite play in this game, even more so than Neal and also more so than Baron Morton. Just because of the guaranteed volume that we're going to get in the running game, and Kansas can definitely be run on. In the receiver room, you can go a few different directions with this. The guy that I like the most price per dollar wise, point per dollar wise, is Coy Eakin. Saw the most volume he's seen, 8 catches for 78 yards. Didn't get in the end zone against TCU, but has only seen the end zone one time all season. But we do think that he's going to build on that rapport with Baron Morton. And if you want to have somebody else that is not going to break the bank from this game, a lot of the pieces are expensive. He is not at 3.8. Dre McCray also got involved, one catch for 44 yards and a touchdown. So very high variance. And somehow he's actually more expensive than both Koyikin and Xavier White, who's seen a good amount of volume. So Koyikin at 3.8 and Xavier White at 3.9. If you're running out Baron Morton and you don't want to pay up for Miles Price, which, at 5.7 is not even really paying up, but it is more expensive than 3.8, 3.9 guys. There are those cheaper options. The one guy I'm kind of off of, and this is sad to say, but like Jerand Bradley has just kind of disappeared this year. He started out the year pretty hot, a couple big games, getting 80 plus yards and a touchdown to start the season. But remember, that was not with Baron Morton. That was with Tyler Show. So the chemistry has really been there more with Miles Price and Koyikin and Xavier White since Baron Morton's been in there. So any of those three are good pairing options with Baron Morton if you're going that route, and definitely want a good amount of Taj Brooks across all builds. So lots of pieces to get to in this game.
Yeah, and Koyikin will certainly be relatively high owned, I think, like somewhere between 15 to 20%. I think you could rise that much just because people see a Texas Tech receiver, that offense under 4K getting volume. So that makes a lot of sense. And then, yeah, I think Brooks will be kind of sneaky because he is higher priced, but this Kansas rush defense is fairly horrible. I think people sometimes forget that. And yeah, Neal gets a lot of that attention, and Brooks is just kind of the forgotten man. He was chalk in the past couple of slates, but at almost 8K, I think people might look elsewhere. So I'm certainly looking in that direction as well. All right, we're going to move right along here. Less exciting game, Tulsa versus Tulane. 23.5-point favorites are Tulane. What a world we live in here. 53.5 total, though. Relatively high. The Tulsa side, I'd love to just be able to go here and say, hey, these guys are all cheap. There's a bunch of injuries to key players, but, Anthony Watkins, he's going to get a lot of volume. He just rushed for 150 yards on Charlotte, but probably not going to do that against Tulane. Probably a really good chance he's not going to do that against Tulane. And you look at the Tulsa receivers with shoulders banged up repeatedly. Devin Williams leading the team in targets with 51, has 400 yards, 30 receptions, 2 touchdowns. But again, I'm not going to try and sell Tulsa as a play here. I just don't see it with these guys, even though there are some relatively cheap prices. But the one player that you would look at as Williams, who's almost 6K, we're not getting a big discount, or Watkins at 5.6, and that would burn a valuable running back spot. Instead, I'd like to go to the Tulane side and look at Mekhi Hughes sitting there at 5.8, which Hughes way back when, what was it, like week 3 against Southern Miss, he was a pretty big play for us. And I know he didn't get double-digit fantasy points, but he still got 14 carries, rushed for 80 yards, just didn't score any touchdowns. And he was only 4.6 then, so it wasn't as if he was a total failure. And I know that might leave some people a little bit, feeling put off, but you have to really look at the amount of work he's been getting. He's playing upwards of 82 to 85% of the offensive snaps, so he's the only running game in town. 25 carries in their last game, 23 before that, 20, 26, 22, just consistently getting 20 plus carries. And one of the things was he wasn't a big, a factor in the receiving game, and he still isn't, but he's getting a little bit of work there each game, something that he can add, but he's just getting so much volume on the ground. And this Tulsa team is a team that is giving up nearly 150 yards per game on the ground. They've been scored on, I believe, just 21 times on the rushing touchdown. So there's just a lot to like here from Mekhi Hughes, and he's just a very, very nice price at 5.8 that fits into our lineups really, really well. So you can expect to look at your opponent's lineups and a lot of head-to-heads and single entry stuff and probably see him there. There's also a lot of merit for using the passing game instead. If you're going to run GPP lineups and he's going to be very high owned, then you can swerve to Pratt, who sits there at 8.2. Pratt definitely finally getting himself healthy. We know how great he can be. It's already rumored that he's going to hit the portal at the end of the year, so he's going to be able to utilize this season as a way to, and of course he wouldn't admit that, but to put this as a get games on film and have a high major come calling. Because if a player of his caliber hits the portal, there's going to be a lot of phone calls hitting him up. This is a very, very high level talent. We're going to probably see somewhere between 20 to 25 passes, but he does have that rushing ability, somewhat around 25 to 50 yards, and is a threat to score. The top receivers on Tulane: Lawrence Keys, Jaquan Jackson, and Chris Brazzell. Keys, 56 targets, 32 catches, 600 yards, 7 touchdowns. Double J, 41 targets, 24 catches, 421 yards, and 4 touchdowns. Brazzell has caught 26 of his 39 for 433 and 2. So no shortage of weapons here for Pratt to throw the football to. I certainly like the idea of running a Tulane stack in some of these large field GPPs, because the total is, for a game that's going to blow out, that is a relatively high total, trending towards 55. And they're going to be a team that scores, majority of those points. So it won't just be Hughes scoring all the touchdowns. I do think Hughes puts up 125 plus rushing yards with ease, but it's not as if he's going to score, 4, 5, 6 touchdowns, something like that. We're going to be looking at Keys in the mix, Brazzell, Jackson, who's pretty intriguing at 5'2". So there's a lot of different ways that you can go with this game, but you certainly don't want to go into the Saturday slate with no pieces of Tulane, because I think that would be a big time mistake. But basically, running game for Maine, passing game for GPP, not a lot of Tulsa for me. And I know that's a disappointment, because I try to pride myself on finding some hidden gems in a shit situation, but I just couldn't do it this time. Do you have anyone in this one that you feel passionately about, or do you kind of in line there with Hughes?
Pretty much just Hughes. I feel like that's where the volume will be concentrated.
Yeah. All right. So next one up here is going to be Miami versus Florida State. Florida State is a 14-point favorite, total of 51.5. I'm going to kick it to you. I got to grab one thing. I'll be right back. Go ahead and let us know what's up.
Mini solo show. All right. So obviously the Florida State offense is more the one to target here. 14-point favorites in this one, and should be able to more or less have their way and do everything they want. Jordan Travis should be healthy for this one. Got a little bit dinged up at the end of the Pitt game, but should be fine. 9,500 is a heck of a lot to pay for Jordan Travis in a game that they are probably going to be able to run just as much as they are going to pass. I don't see him necessarily needing to scramble a ton or have a whole lot of designed runs. He has not been doing as much of that this year anyhow. And so, we would need like a 304 type game from Jordan Travis in order to make that 9,500 price moderately worthwhile. And I don't, it's certainly within his range of outcomes, but I don't think that that's a place that I'm going to go. Trey Benson, on the other hand, at 7K, we haven't seen a whole lot of competitive games for Florida State, and I think this is the type of game that they're going to be that they have been saving a high volume Trey Benson game for. I think that there's some potential that he gets a good amount of work in the passing game as well, and so I'm intrigued. I'm not necessarily jamming him in, but I'm very intrigued in Trey Benson at 7K. And then in the receiver room, it is going to be pretty injury report dependent. Both Keon Coleman and Johnny Wilson are banged up. However, both are expected to go. So it really kind of depends on what your take is on where Miami is going to try to shut them down. I think they're both extremely athletic receivers. It's difficult to shut them down without throwing a double team on there. I think with Keon Coleman being in more of a rhythm, even though he's higher priced, I would probably trend toward using Keon Coleman at 6'6". That's still a very, very fair price for a guy of his ability and explosiveness. And then Jaheim Bell down at 5'1". I mean, we haven't really seen like a mega Jaheim Bell game. Like he's had a good amount of like okay games for the price, but we haven't seen the like 8 catches, 100 yards, and 2 touchdowns Jaheim Bell game. Like that's not happened, right? And so I'm, as much as the brand, I would love to get to Jaheim Bell in this one. 5'1", it's kind of like, well, if we're going to do that, probably just want to find the extra 400 to get up to Johnny Wilson if we know that he's healthy. I think there's a lot more explosiveness and downfield ability to Johnny Wilson's game if he is fully healthy in this one. On the Miami side, it's tough sledding against that Florida State defense. I'm probably not in on Tyler Van Dyke at all. That's not really going to be a thing. Probably not in on the running game. Just number one, they're going to be chasing points. Number two, the running game is pretty diverse and diluted to the point that it's hard to really hone in on one individual guy, whether it be Mark Fletcher, who did get a ton of carries in their most recent game against NC State, but we also are always going to have the Henry Parrish thorn in our sides and Don Chaney getting some work as well. So definitely not a consolidated enough running game, even in the best of times, and up against that Florida State defense and chasing points. I don't really want to get to that running game. Passing game does have some intrigue. Restrepo is the obvious guy that he's more or less the number one in terms of high volume targets. Not a ton of efficiency. We've seen a little bit more out of Colby Young at times, and he's all the way down there at 4,500. I think if you're looking for a run back or a sneak on the Miami side, probably looking to Colby Young to do that. And that 4,500 price tag has been kind to us in the past, right? So should have enough volume and involvement and potentially also efficiency and red zone love that if you are running like a Travis and Wilson or Travis and Coleman stack and want to run it back with someone, Colby Young is a cheap enough way to go to help mitigate that 9,500 Travis price. But I don't see the need to do that. I think if you want to take just the Florida State side on this one, I think that would be just fine.
Yeah, I definitely agree. It pains me because I want to use Jaheim Bell, and I feel like when he finally does, if he does like have that bust out game, I'm gonna feel awfully upset that I don't have any exposure there. But last week was really that chance. There was nobody else, and he just had the 5 for 23, and Ja'Kai Douglas ends up just blasting the slate off. So kind of tough to really get behind Bell until he slips back under 5K right now. But injury situations are important here because the price tags on both Coleman and Wilson, shoot, man, 5.5 and 6.6 are certainly appealing. So I'm on board with that. And I always love Colby Young. He's my favorite of the Miami receivers, but it's definitely a tough spot. All right, next game, Arizona versus Colorado. We got some Pac-12 action here. Arizona 10.5-point favorites is what I saw here. 54.5 total. Now, one thing we know about Colorado, they're going to give up points to every team they play. Their defense is just as bad as your Trojans, and they don't hold anyone. And one thing about this Arizona team is they're looking pretty damn good lately. I don't know what they got going on there, but the second that Jaden DeLora got unhealthy and they turned to the Noah Fifta kid, their fortunes have turned around completely. A really impressive win against UCLA last week that I did not see coming. I thought it might be relatively close, but to win 27-10 and their defense really hold the Bruins down like that. Noah threw for 300 yards and 3 touchdowns against UCLA's defense, which is pretty damn good on its own right, and he made it look very, very soft. Consistently high volume in the passing attack. 5 straight games, over 30 attempts since taking over as the starter. He has eclipsed the 300 passing yard mark in 3 of those 5, one of which was 275. Now he gets the dream matchup against this Colorado secondary that's going to try and push the pace. They're going to try and score points. It's just going to be an absolute amazing situation. The pricing here is a major failure to me. I've been praising DK lately on the college football or the college basketball side, like, hey, tighter pricing, this is great. But this is a total and utter failure of them to price him at 6K. There is absolutely zero chance he won't be in my main lineup, and there's zero chance he probably won't be in 50%. That's a low number of the lineups that we see on most of these contests. There's just, I mean, it's stupid, unfortunately. I would have preferred him to be like 7 or 8K, and I still would have probably considered him, but 6K is just a no-brainer click in. The running game for Arizona, also very cheap. You have Jonah Coleman sitting there at 4.3, which I know sometimes people get hung up on playing a quarterback with a running back, but at this point, you guys know how we feel about it, the college game. Michael Wiley, who is struggling to be healthy, has seemingly hurt himself again. So he's going to come in there with a questionable tag, which means at 4.3, Jonah Coleman probably getting 20-plus touches, whether that's a combination of receptions, targets, and carries. But at 4.3, he's a pretty optimal play as well. And then you look at the receivers here, fairly priced, I'd say, on Cowing at 6.7 and McMillan at 6.3. And then you have a ton of options at 4K and below. The Tanner McLachlan kid at 4K is a pretty sneaky option. I think most people, when they're going to look at receivers here, they're not typically looking at the tight end. I think Troya McMillan will be the highest owned by far, with Cowing right behind him. But Tanner's a nice little value piece that you can get to this offense with a lot of points, and he's been getting a ton of targets as well. Third on the team in targets with 36, which is well below the other two. But when you look at what he's been doing the last few games, bringing that up, 4+ targets in 4 straight, which is 5 for 66 in his last game. Has a couple of touchdowns. He's just a very solid option at 4K. I don't know how he doesn't pay that off as well. Cowing leads the team in targets with 92. We're used to that from his UTEP days. 68 catches, 530 yards, 9 touchdowns. Like Noah is just the real deal, man. And then T. McMillan, 76 targets, 52 catches, 750 yards, 7 touchdowns. This Arizona offense, I just can't even pretend to say that I saw this coming, because I certainly didn't. And I would have thought that Jaden DeLora gave them the best chance to win, and he didn't. So it's just wild. But yeah, I think the Arizona mini stack is in play here. Whether that's the quarterback, which is a yes, and Coleman, or two wide receivers, which are affordable. Because at this point, Cowing McMillan, they probably should be priced at 8K for this matchup alone, because they're going to be 2 of the higher scoring receivers by far if this plays out the way we expect it to. It will take a very special effort from Colorado to hold this Arizona offense in check. Now, on the Colorado side, I'm less excited about, even though they've been pretty damn good this year as well. They got all that early season hype. It's kind of died down a lot now, but this offense is certainly potent, but this Arizona defense is the real deal. And they've held a lot of good offenses, great offenses in check. Shedeur Sanders at 9.2, that's just going to be a really tough price point to justify here, even in GPPs. We've seen in 3 of his last 4 games, he's been below 20 fantasy points. That just comes with the fact that teams are playing a lot differently against him, keeping things in front of them, and they're not having those deep, crazy long plays like they were having earlier in the season. Keeping everything in front of them is going to be the type of defense that Arizona likes to play, and that's what they're going to do. Running backs for Colorado, Dylan Edwards, aside from that first week where he was basically a receiver, he hasn't been relevant since, and his price just hasn't changed. Hankerson had a couple of nice early season games. He hasn't been really all that great. And then we had Alton McCaskill for a little bit, and then he decided to redshirt, which I think is probably the better idea, just to get him back for next year anyway. So this running back room for Colorado is very lackluster to me. And then we had Xavier Weaver pegged from day one. He was very good for us throughout. Went through a little bit of a midseason lull. He's still going to be the highest targeted guy on the team, him and usually Jimmy Horn. And I know that Travis Hunter's in the mix there as well, and had 8 catches for 98 yards and a touchdown against Oregon State. One of the few bright spots for them. But really, the prices, I think, at this point are fair for the Colorado guys, except for maybe Horn at 6K. You could maybe make a case there, but he's obviously losing targets and has been the last couple of weeks. So the Colorado side is more of the GPP look. If you're looking for a run back here, you probably, you might see some lineups with Hunter. I think that's where most people would go, just because, well, he's, super exciting. That's the guy I want to run. If you can get to the 7K range for Weaver, he's the one I feel more comfortable with. But that's a lot of salary for me to dedicate to a team that I just don't think is going to score very many points. And when it comes down to is I'm hyping up an Arizona stack for football in 2023, which is not on my bingo card. I don't know if it was on yours. Certainly wasn't on mine, but here we are in what is this, week 11, and we're going to be playing 2 or 3 Arizona guys. What a world, man. What a world. So are you on board with the Arizona stack as well? I mean, what are we doing here? There's got to be somebody on Colorado we can use, but I guess I'm a believer in Arizona now. Do you believe in that?
Oh, yeah, man. Everyone against Colorado. I think, it seems like Coleman is probably going to be the guy at running back, and super cheap price on him. So even if you have Fafita, like I don't see anything wrong with going with both of those. They're both extremely cheap pieces going against the worst defense that's not USC. And so it's just all kinds of fantasy goodness will happen. If you are looking for a little bit of a sneak on the run back on the Colorado side, the Arizona defense, not last week, but the week before, gave up 571-1 to Jack Velling on Oregon State. So athletic kind of move tight end leads me to a Michael Harrison type run back. 4,200. It's not like we're getting him for free, but he's in that range that we've been successful. And we've seen Michael Harrison have success against SC, which everyone has, and against Oregon, which not everyone has. And also, in that Colorado State game, that crazy, back and forth bonanza, that was like the Michael Harrison coming out party. And so, he hasn't done a whole lot since. Very, very quiet against UCLA, as was most of Colorado. But I think that this could be a spot where, if you're looking for a run back and Arizona has the receivers locked up pretty well, could be some opportunities for Harrison underneath and possibly in the red zone.
Love it. Shout out to Jack Velling, who is just like a true touchdown machine in every sense of the word. All right, moving on here, we're going to talk about, we're going backwards a little bit, but we wanted to kind of shuffle up the game deck. Alabama versus Kentucky. We have Bama at -11, 47 total. Kind of want to bet Kentucky, but I need to just be reassured here. So break down this one for us.
So I don't end up watching a ton of SEC for whatever reason. I would love to watch more. It just doesn't usually work out that way. I did get to watch pretty much the entirety of Alabama, Tennessee, and for whatever reason, the second half of that game, Jalen Milroe looked like a completely different quarterback. Like, just there was all kinds of poise that didn't exist before. Going through his progressions a lot more quickly, delivering balls accurately. Receivers didn't have to be wide open in order for him to hit them. He was hitting timing routes, like just not the things that you would expect out of Jalen Milroe, given what we had seen up until that point. And they started to introduce design runs, which they hadn't, like that was a thing, but like it wasn't a concept in the flow of the offense. It was, we're trying to convert a 3rd and short, so we're going to have him scramble around a bit. And it was in the flow of the offense, and it worked well, and it created a much more open dynamic in that second half that allowed them to beat Tennessee pretty comfortably, because that was not a comfortable game in the first half for Alabama. I don't know what Nick Saban did at halftime, man. He flipped the switch that turned Jalen Milroe into Jalen Hurts or something, but he made it work. And that same Jalen Milroe showed up against LSU, which is not surprising because most people show up against LSU. That defense hasn't really shown us much, but this is like the most confident and talented version of Jalen Milroe that has existed. And if you were to tell me at the beginning of the year, Jalen Milroe is 9K against Kentucky, like, are you going to spend more than 3 seconds talking about him? I probably wouldn't have said that I would, but I'm actually pretty interested. I think in terms of a guy that's going to be extremely low owned, I don't think a lot of people are going to pay that price for him. And they're going to see, okay, the game's at Kentucky. He's coming off of an unreal performance against LSU. There's no way that he could repeat that. If he's second half against Tennessee, Jalen Milroe, I think he can. Maybe not like 50 fantasy points, but I think 40 is definitely in range. And at 9K, I think 40 would be a pretty good outcome. Just especially with how much the run game for him has opened things up for the entire offense and has allowed him to score those rushing touchdowns, which are so crucial. So I actually really do like him. The passing game for Bama is pretty consolidated and pretty much just Burton and Isaiah Bond getting the bulk of the targets. But I don't even see the need to pair him with a receiver, given how much damage he's been able to do in the running game, both last week and the second half of the Tennessee game. So very, very interested in him, especially given the savings that we're going to get with the Arizona guys. It will allow for some spend ups, but that other people might not go to. And I think that's a good place to go. Obligatory mention of Jace McClellan. He's been better, man. Like, I know we've been kind of down on Jace McClellan over the course of the show and the season. But 27 carries against Tennessee was a heck of a lot of volume. Didn't get quite as much against LSU. No fault of his own, but just Jalen Milroe was on a heat check, right? So hot hand, didn't really get the same Jace McClellan volume. If you're not going to go Jalen Milroe, I think Jace McClellan is a viable option. This Kentucky defense is not really what it once was. We've seen competent offenses, which I think this Bama offense is now, whatever they've done, have kind of turned them into a pretty competent offense. And so I think at 6'5", Jace is definitely in play. Not something I'm going to force or lock by any means, but definitely worthy of your consideration. And if you do want to get to a Jermaine Burton or an Isaiah Bond, those are viable options, but I wouldn't necessarily force it. Kobe Prentice has been kind of a all or nothing deep threat. The guy I'd like to see them get involved a little bit more is Kendrick Law. He's been extremely explosive. Whenever they have given him touches, and I don't necessarily know that we'll see it this game, but at the same time, if you see that, 80-yard touchdown out of nowhere with a guy that is less than 1% owned, might end up being Kendrick Law at 3.7. So deep GPP shout, MME type play, but somebody that we want to consider. That's probably all we need from the Bama side. And then on the Kentucky side, I mean, it's tough going up against the Bama defense. Obviously, historically pretty tough defense. Recently, not quite so much. LSU was able to do a good amount of damage against them. Don't know that I'm going to get to Ray Davis at 7,800. He is my guy. Don't think this is necessarily the spot for him. Not necessarily because the talent's not there. Talent's obviously there. But I think they're going to be in not quite the Ray Davis game script. I think they're probably going to be chasing some points. I like Bama a good amount in this one. I don't know, you might be on the Kentucky side or liking that, home dog of I think they're plus 11 last I saw it. So, that seems like a decent spot to take a home dog, but I think they're going to be chasing even more points than that. So don't love anything about Devin Leary at all this season. I wish I did, but I don't. So makes it a little bit hard to get to the trio of Key, Brown, and Robinson. I don't really recommend any of them. If I had to pick one, probably Dane Key is going to have, the most ability to be explosive in this one. But I think I just like the Bama side from this one. I think they'll control game flow and have a lot of time possession and make things pretty tough for Kentucky on the defensive side.
Yeah, this is one I don't really want any of for DFS, but you're right. The 11 points at home kind of felt like a spot where, I stood out to me as a betting opportunity. But you really kind of just laid it down that Kentucky's not an exciting team this year, and I didn't think that Devin Leary was going to be a non-factor in this offense. The way that Kentucky football had been trending over the past couple of seasons, it really seemed like this was going to be a year with all the weapons they had that they were going to be a real big, at least for DFS purposes, team. And that just hasn't really turned out to be the case. And injuries might have zapped some, of his explosiveness, but it's kind of disappointing to see for sure. All right, next game, Oklahoma State versus UCF is the highest total on this slate for DraftKings, 65.5. And you have a 2.5-point favorite, that is Oklahoma State. All sorts of goodness here. We like the Arizona stack. We know that. We just talked about that. We like Tulane. There's a variety of Tulane guys we like. And then this is a game. And we still have the Huskies on the slate too, and the Tennessee Vols. And there's a lot of good options on this slate. But this game is going to be an absolute video game, as it should be. We've had these situations before where games like this kind of underperform, but I don't see that happening here. You have two defenses that really can't contain anything, especially on the rushing side. UCF, we know they're giving up over 200 yards per game on the ground. Oklahoma State's not very good either, right around 167 yards per game on the ground to their opponent. So both have struggled against the rush. You have a situation here with UCF where you've got your dude, John Rice Plumlee, JRP as we call him, a rushing quarterback who now that he's gotten healthy, he showed that rushing upside a bit. He scored 3 straight rushing touchdowns, at least 1 in 3 of each of his last game, 45 plus rushing yards in each of his last 2 games. So that aspect is cooking. He didn't throw very well against Cincinnati, but they did end up winning, and a lot of that had to do with some of the running attack that they had there. But against West Virginia, sharp, 275 yards, 3 touchdowns. That is a secondary we know he can beat. Going up against Oklahoma State, we can count on him to certainly score some points. Now, quarterback is usually I want all the Michael Penix in the world, and it's almost blasphemous. We're going to talk about that, for me not to be just plugging him in. But he's a very expensive price. Jordan Travis, I didn't mention it, but at this point you should know, he's an elite GPP play. And then I'm looking down the list here. Milroe, you mentioned, yeah, he's fine. Haynes King, we're probably not paying that. McCarthy, as much as, it was nice to get a different take here from Michelle, I'm probably not playing McCarthy. There's really just 2 cheap quarterbacks below Pratt that we can look at, one of which, is the Arizona QB, and then one of which is probably JRP here. So at 7.5, we're certainly looking his way if we don't want to run a 4 running back lineup, which we might still want to do that as well. On the running back side, RJ Harvey's only 6'7". This is certainly a great spot to look at him. He's still, regardless of game script, going to get those 15 to 16 carries, and then he's going to contribute a little bit in the passing game as well. So a very versatile weapon there, almost 900 rushing yards this year, 9 touchdowns, but he's also got over 200 receiving yards, and that's on 15 receptions. So when he gets those passes, he's usually doing some damage with them. Johnny Richardson snaps, unfortunately, early season, they were up. Now they're starting to go back down. He's below 20% now, and Harvey's have kind of leveled off there about 60, 70%. So it's tough for Richardson. He's just kind of getting the spot duty there, water break duty, whatever you want to call it. And then the UCF receivers, this is the other thing. Every week I say Jordan Travis is elite GPP play, and then the UCF receivers are super cheap. And that's the case here. None of them above 6K here on DraftKings. And Javon Baker's going to contribute a lot. Kobe Hudson, Whittemore's even been doing some stuff, but it's mainly just the Hudson Baker show. Hudson there at 5.2. Now you're going to look at his last few games and be like, man, he hasn't really been getting targeted. But against West Virginia, he flashed and showed hey, remember me, I can still put up big numbers. And he was pretty much the WR1 for the first month of the season. So I really like him at that 5.2 price, because I think that if people are going to use a UCF receiver, I think the tendency is to kind of go to Baker there, just because he has been more consistent or has shown more upside the last month of the season. And I know it's only $700, so it's not a huge difference, but just that little bit of discount and that difference in ownership is enough to make me want to play Kobe Hudson. So I like JRP alone, or with Harvey, or with Hudson. And then on the Oklahoma State side, always got to shout out Alan Bowman, but geez Louise, they got him up to 6'9" now. What the heck? We got a 7K Alan Bowman here. That's pretty tough. UCF's defense is horrid, and he just threw for 334 yards against Oklahoma. Looked fantastic. He scored a rushing touchdown at that, but I can't probably play too much 7K Alan Bowman. What we are going to do is we're going to pay any price they ask us to for Allie Gordon. And at 7.9 on DraftKings, against one of the worst, if not the worst, rush defense in the galaxy, that's just an easy plug and play. He needed to be higher. 9K, I'm still plugging him in. I know we don't get too many 9K running backs, but he probably should have been even higher than this. And this 7.9 won't be enough to not see him be 50 to 60% owned. And I hate that on a 12-game slate. Absolutely hate it. But I always say, if it's chalk, I'm not going to fade it just to fade it. If it's bad chalk, I'm out. But great chalk like this, yes, I'm all the way in. You look at what he's just been doing. It's stupid. Like you'd expect him to start to slow down or defenses to be able to stop him, but he's just so good they can't. 33 carries against Oklahoma. They're just running Ollie Gordon into the ground, a la Braylon Allen during his first season at Wisconsin. They might pay the price for this later, but right now we're going to ride it and we're going to love it. So Ollie Gordon is obviously the top RB on the slate. Might even be the best option as well overall at any position. Oklahoma State receivers have been good to us. Leon Johnson did decide that was the big thing to wonder about if he was going to burn the red shirt there. They did opt to do that because they were shorthanded at receiver. 5 catches for 70 yards. He was pretty solid for 4-5. Would have loved to get a touchdown. But 9 targets in that game, caught 5 of them. Still pretty solid. Brendan Presley had 9 targets as well as he returned. Rashad Owens had 15 targets, 10 catches for 136 yards. So with Owens kind of falling out of favor there just because the price kept going up. He wasn't chalky at all, and then he blew up the slate. So at 5-1, Owens is definitely a guy to look at. I do think we see him kind of sift back down into that 5 for 50 range that we always talk about. But he's still in play. A lot will have to do with if Jaden Bray ends up playing and Shetron. If Bray's out again, Owens is likely going to be, getting WR1 targets once again. So he's certainly fine. You don't want to just play Ollie Gordon in this game and move along. This is one of the high totals where, yes, you do want to stack it, not just because of the high total, but both these defenses are awful. And Gordon, just having Gordon in it won't be enough. I don't think you compete. You might still cash, but I don't think you're winning anything high. You're not winning any tournaments, certainly. You're probably not having a top 5% finish if you don't have multiple pieces in this. So Gordon, obviously, JRP, definitely. Harvey would be a nice look. I don't foresee Harvey having too much ownership. I think that people have it in their head that Oklahoma State's rush defense and their defense in general is fairly decent. Even though you look at their games they keep playing, they're giving up a ton of points. So Harvey definitely makes sense if you can get him there at 6-7, and especially if you're considering a 4 running back lineup. If you're not doing JRP and your super flex, then Harvey would be the guy to consider doing that. And then Hudson. The wide receivers for UCF also look to me like they'll be quite low owned, even though they probably shouldn't be. So this is one of those rare occasions where the highest scoring slate on the game might not have as many chalky pieces as it ordinarily would, outside of maybe JRP and obviously Ollie Gordon. So you're a big JRP guy. You're usually pretty in tune with UCF. We know we're all in on Arizona. We know there's a few other spots on here we really like. We're going to start running out of room here. So what kind of priority are you placing on number of players from a game like this?
Yeah, Ollie Gordon is that's a given. So it's kind of like Ollie Gordon plus, right? And I have seen that Plumlee is starting to run again a little bit more. And so you don't want Plumlee when Plumlee's not running. That's the time to get off of him. And 3 weeks ago, the Oklahoma State game, the Oklahoma game rather, he ran for a touchdown, but he wasn't running. And so we've seen more of the scramble athletic ability in the last couple of weeks. And that's the time to get on the train when that's trending upwards and price has come down while running has come up. I think we're all in on Plumlee again for this one. So with those two pieces and because he's running more, I don't necessarily see the need to pair him with a receiver. Kind of the same aspect or same philosophy as we have with Milroe. Think he can get enough damage done on the ground that you don't need to pair him with a receiver. But I'm fine with 2. I think, if you want to add in a third, it probably would be a UCF pass catcher. But I don't need to force that.
Very good. All right. Next one is Tennessee, Missouri. Give you another SEC game here. 57 total. So we have another one with a relatively high total. 1.5 point favorites are the Vols. Missouri has been a fantastic DFS team this year at multiple positions. The Vols, not so much. But the young kid, the future legend and star is maybe getting some time here. So the Vols are intriguing. But this is going to be a very fun game to watch. It's on my priority list for viewing, most definitely. Break this one down for us.
So do we think that there will be a quarterback timeshare with Tennessee in this one? Like they're maybe gonna get away from Joe Milton finally.
I hope
Would
so.
love it. Would love it. I don't know that we can play a 6'5" Nico like hoping he gets 12 throws or something like that. I don't think we're quite there yet, but it can't come soon enough, right? Just really unlock that Tennessee offense. The biggest thing to watch in this one, Luther Burden, a little banged up after the Georgia game. If he doesn't play, that really changes the dynamic of this one, or if he's limited or will give it a go, or something other than like Luther Burden is fully healthy. Because Luther Burden at fully healthy at 6'9" is like the easiest non-Arizona play of the slate. Like he should go absolutely bonkers in this one if he's a full go. It's a hard thing to hedge on a Thursday for a Saturday game without getting full beat writer information and practice reports as to the severity of the injury and his ability to move and cut and if he's even going to go at all. But if he's fully healthy and seems to be moving well in pregame, Luther Burden at 6'9" is a pretty high priority for me in this one. As is in any event, whether Burden goes or not, but especially if not, Cody Schrader at 6K. The guy has no one talks about Cody Schrader, and the guy has consistently put up not Ollie Gordon numbers, but not far off either. I mean, 20 plus carries for most of the last few games, going 112 yards and a touchdown against Georgia of all teams while chasing points. Like they are getting Cody Schrader involved. And so look, there's a lot of good running backs to play on this slate. And especially if it's a 4 running back slate, I think he's got to be in consideration, but I think either way, he's got to be in consideration with that kind of volume, especially if there is news that Luther Burden is banged up or not going to, be fully healthy or not going to go at all. We've got to give a lot of consideration to Cody Schrader. On the other side, on the Tennessee side, that quarterback drama that we joke about, I don't think that there's actually a chance that they move on from Joe Milton in this one. Maybe towards the end, maybe throws a couple picks or something and they say, hey, what do we have with Nico? But I think Joe Milton probably is still starting, right? And I probably should also mention Brady Cook as a viable option. There's just too many other higher upside quarterback options. But if you are all in on game stacking this one and Burden is healthy, I think Brady Cook can certainly be used. I would rather use the Tennessee quarterback if we had a good Tennessee quarterback, and certainly if we had Nico starting at 6'5", I'm all in on that. But getting to Joe Milton, given the uncertainty there and just his general lack of talent. As far as the running game, we don't get enough of Jalen Wright. I want there to be more Jalen Wright, but for some reason we only get 12 to 15 touches of Jalen Wright, and he's really good, and they should give him the ball more. But just because I think that doesn't mean that they're going to. And at 5,400, if somehow we got a random 20-touch game out of Jalen Wright, he's a fantastic play. But they are just not giving him the volume that he deserves. We're seeing, some of it go to Dylan Sampson. We're seeing a lot of the work in the passing game, which passing game is not their strong suit with Joe Milton at quarterback. So I just would love to see more Jalen Wright in general. If you want to take a GPP shot that this is the game that he gets volume and finally gets over 30 fantasy points, at 5.4, that would be a fantastic outcome. It is a pretty low percentage outcome as well. But he is somebody to watch that I think should get more volume at some point. As far as the receivers go, Squirrel White is probably still the dude. again, he's got not the best quarterback thrown to him. So you can definitely beat this Missouri team. Carson Beck did not have the game that I was hoping he would have. Ladd McConkey did not have the game I was hoping he would have. They still had good games. They didn't need to do quite as much as I thought they were going to. Didn't keep the foot on the gas the way that I thought they were going to, but you can definitely do that against Missouri if you need to. And I think Tennessee will probably need to keep throwing a little bit longer than Georgia did. So Squirrel White at 5'8", definitely in play. Our boy Ramel Keaton probably also in play at 4.7, especially in game stacks, definitely in play. Going to be relying on explosive plays for Ramel Keaton. We need that 40-yard touchdown. We're probably not getting, 8 12-yard passes to get him to, 100 yards and a touchdown. But explosive plays are definitely a possibility with him. That is probably it for me from this one. I guess we can give a shout to the other Missouri receivers, especially if Burden is out. Theo Weiss and Mookie Cooper, they're not massively discounted to the point that I want to jam them into a main lineup. But if Burden is out, and definitely out, I think each of them at 5.1 and 4.9 respectively are guys that we would have to consider if we get that news that Burden is out. But honestly, the pivot for me would probably be they're going to lean on the ground game a little bit more, and that's going to be even more volume for Cody Schrader. So any and all of those pieces are viable. Very, very juicy fantasy context. We just got to wait a little bit to see some news shake out with regard to health on the Missouri side and sanity in terms of who they're starting at quarterback on the Tennessee side. But definitely want to pay attention to.
Yeah, and it's tough because it is one of the later games, so there'll be limited options to swap to. You'll want to definitely have possibly 2 spots there, or at least know ahead of time, like, hey, here's the swap if I get the news that Burton's in. Here's the swap if I get the news that he's out. Like, make sure you're not just waiting in the wind. You actually have a plan. Yeah, as far as Tennessee, like Ramel Keaton, like most people probably think that he's just not very good, but he's very good. If you would have stuck him on even Virginia, like what's happening with Malik Washington right now, like Keaton would be having those numbers. He is very good, but Joe Milton just like he's got a cannon arm, and everyone always like, yeah, this is Uncle Rico, dude can throw over the mountains. Like that's great, but he can't read defenses. He can't throw accurately. I just can't use anyone on the balls until he's out of there. This offense has been video game-esque for years, and this is the first season where it's just been like no interest to use them. I tried to get on Keaton when he was really cheap, and the targets just weren't coming his way, and I'm just pretty much fed up. We need to see Nico Iamaleava ASAP, and I know we got a little bit of time there because it was against UConn, but it's still, you're right, they're still going to go with Milton unless something drastically changes, and right now it's just a hands-off situation. But I do think before it's all said and done, Nico does get a start, and it might even be, depending on how this game plays out, it might even be as soon as the following week. We'll see. And then Schrader, like the Vols rush defense, it's hit or miss. Like the Jason McClellan actually just pillaged them, but they've done pretty good against like Ray Davis and some various others. So kind of on the fence there, because I don't want to now start to buy in on Schrader and then have him just punch me in the face. But it's hard to argue with how great he's been playing for sure, and especially like you said, if Burden ends up being out. All right, next one is Utah versus Washington. A total below 50 for a Washington game. Say what? 49.5. They are 9.5 point favorites, but they are facing off against Utah, so I get it. And the prices of everyone is so expensive, which is going to mean the Huskies are going to be super low owned, which has kind of been rare the past few weeks. It's funny because early in the year they were low owned, nobody really paying attention, they blow up, then everybody rosters them, and now they get a matchup that's kind of like real bad on paper. The offense outside of Dylan Johnson, the passing offense I should say, has been kind of stagnant. Just the way that defenses are playing them is what's happening, honestly. But Penix at 10-8, it's just a real tough order. He's still going to throw the ball 30-ish times, but with no rushing upside. And if Johnson scores, multiple touchdowns again, it's just going to hurt him so bad that he won't be able to pay this off. And even if he throws for 350 and 3, he's still probably not truly paying off almost $11K. Like 30 is good at that, but you'd want a little bit more. So it definitely takes him off the table for main lineups for me, but I would always have shares of him in GPPs, of course. Same with Ramo Dunze, 8-9. We're getting up there in price. He's pretty much, regardless of how the passing game is, if it struggles, he's still going to get his, but he's at that price point now, Marvin Harrison status, where, 80 and a touchdown is just not enough. It has to be 125 and a touchdown, possibly two. My man, Jalen Polk, we were able to ride with him for quite a few weeks, but now they've got him over 8K. So we're going to take a step back from him as well, at least this week. And they've been super banged up, obviously. Jalen McMillan, looking like it's going to be a long-term thing now. It's kind of hurting my feelings there. Giles Jackson, who's just, fast as hell. He's banged up. Jeremy Bernard, he's been banged up. Like, there's all these injuries in the passing game. So it actually made sense that Dylan Johnson was just like, here you go, run all over this defense. We need to keep our two healthy receivers upright and not kill them. Let's just give you the rock. And that's what they did. And man, I could see them putting a lot on his shoulders once again. Utah's rush defense and defense in overall general is pretty good. But the Huskies are just a different animal. It's just not a team that Utah would normally see on a week-to-week basis in the Pac-12. And if Dylan Johnson's going to continue to get this kind of work, he's at least consideration for GPPs. He's not going to make my main lineup. I'm probably off this game in Maine, which is kind of a first. Whenever the Huskies are on the slate, I usually jam somebody in there. But it's hard to argue with the work that Dylan Johnson's getting. And I feel pretty passionately that most defenses going forward are just going to play the same way, and they're going to make Dylan beat them. More injuries for Utah, not what we want to hear here. Jaquin Jackson, who really kind of took over as the alpha back, got hurt. So now we're dealing with a questionable tag for him as well. Jalen Glover would step in there. He had 14 carries against ASU, so had 4-2 against the Huskies, a Huskies defense that is nowhere near as stout as Utah. They're good, but they can definitely give up points, yardage, all that good stuff. So Glover definitely would make sense at 4-2 if you're looking for value in somebody there. I would imagine Sion Vaki gets some time and some snaps and some carries there, depending on what happens with Jackson. I was super hyped and all in on him going in that Oregon game, and they stopped giving him the ball, and then they gave him nothing against ASU. Now that they've got more injuries again, Vaki's going to have to get some touches. I wouldn't be shocked if he scored a touchdown. He's a pretty high level GPP play. Obviously, there's a chance at a bagel, but he could potentially put up 30 here, depending on if they ride him, because they're running out of options in the running back room. So between Glover and Sion, those guys are going to get most of the touches, not because they're the best, even though they're pretty good, but they just don't have any other bodies. They're going to start having to break into the red shirts here soon if another player gets hurt. So as much as it pains me, I don't have a lot of main team love for this team whatsoever or this game. I will have GPPs because when I look at, there's a few places that try to predict ownership. And when I look at one in particular, all of the Huskies are below 3%, which is kind of intriguing. But at the same time, how many points are they actually going to score here? I'm kind of nervous about this game, actually. It's the first game this season where I felt like the Huskies could maybe lose. Every other game this season I felt pretty comfortable and confident in, but I'm not too sure about this one just yet.
Yeah, Utah will do that to you, man. Utah makes you nervous.
Yeah, they do. That's why I was just going to ask you your take on this one, because Utah they have a way to grind games out.
Yeah, especially coming off of like what was such an offensive based game. Like, it's just such a different game stylistically than Washington played last week. But I'm also excited to see Penix air it out again and see like the him and Rome connection. Not necessarily like that I'm gonna pay 8-9 for Rome. I don't think it's the place to do that, but I want to see that kind of happen again, because that's, I think, really more of what Washington should be. Not necessarily the Dylan Johnson bowling ball. Like, that's fun in its own right and has its place, but I think Washington's true identity is airing it out with Penix. So I would like to see them get back to that tendency a little bit.
Yeah, the betting lean here is the over 49.5, because even though it's Utah expected to slow down or whatever, Huskies are still the better team. and they should be able to, force their style, like you said, but it might be done through some more shorter routes here. I think Polk might have a good game here if they do. But I kind of like the over 49.5, because even like the game against Arizona, they hit that mark, and that was a defensive battle there for a while. The only game they didn't hit that in was the ASU game, which was kind of, they admitted they overlooked them and kind of almost pissed that one away. So there might be a betting opportunity there for the total I might have to get in on. But other than that, yeah, I think we're kind of just using them for GPP and moving on. All right, we've got 2 games left here. Minnesota versus Purdue is where we're going to go next. Purdue 1-point favorites, total of 47.5. Not quite the Iowa Minnesota battle there, but kind of on the lower scoring side nonetheless. Purdue's been a team that we've been able to count on the last couple of seasons, but lately they've just been kind of mediocre. And this Minnesota team I expected to be much better passing this year, and it hasn't come to fruition. So where might we be looking in this one for DFS goodness?
I mean, yeah, you try to target Purdue. Like that is usually a good team to be going up against. The one spot where I could see that working out is Daniel Jackson. He's, as bad as the Minnesota offense is overall, he has been a high volume pass catcher. I mean, 7-101, 7-120 and 1. Not quite that prolific against Illinois in the most recent week, but got in the end zone. And that 7-101 game was against Iowa. So like, even in the toughest of conditions, not just the opposing defense, but also the context of the offense that he's operating in, has been able to get it done fairly consistently. There's just like no reason to go there, right? Like you don't need to unearth diamonds just for the sake of doing it. There's enough good plays in enough different wide receiver rooms to have more of a ceiling, I guess, than this one would have. But if you want a low-owned guy in the mid 5K range, Daniel Jackson is your guy. I don't think a lot of people are getting to him, even though it's against a pretty terrible Purdue defense. On the other side, Purdue side, obligatory avoidance of Hudson Card, has not scored over 15 fantasy points in like 6 weeks. So even though he's 5K, there's just no reason to do that, especially with a 6K no feed against Colorado. Deion Burks, we thought after week 1 was going to be like the second coming of Rondell Moore, and that hasn't really panned out. He's had some flash games since then against Wisconsin, Illinois, showed up a little bit against Michigan, 3 for 43 and a touchdown. Volume is just not really there in the Purdue passing offense the way that it has been in years past. As far as the Purdue running game, I mean, Minnesota is kind of tough sledding in general to go up against. They are more or less splitting touches. We're not getting like the high volume Maccabee games that we saw at the beginning. And even as recently as like the Ohio State game, we saw 18 carries out of Maccabee then. Not getting that with Tyrone Tracy, kind of back and healthy, and getting split, if not the majority of the work. So probably staying away from the Purdue running game for a multitude of reasons. And, I think if it's kind of the same thing, like if you want a super low owned MME play from this game, or you're trying to game stack this game for some unknown reason, Burks and Jackson would probably be the places to go, but it just feels extremely like forcing it to even, consider that when there's so many higher upside options available throughout the slate.
Yeah, and the Burks, man, like he's got a lot of targets, but his catch rate is 43% on 73 targets. He's just not getting a lot of quality looks.
Yeah, and that's not on him, right? Like it's not like he's got a lot of drops in there. That's on Hudson Card.
Yep, 100%. I have maybe a 3K play here. not anything that I'm going to be sitting here like line in the sand, like I'm playing him, but Jaden Dixon-Veal, the last couple of games, 10 of his 19 targets in the past 2 games. So 8 receptions, maybe Dixon-Veal at the 3K. You want to throw somebody out there for some extra value, you have it there. But I think with the Arizona guys, we don't have to get too wild if we can help it. All right, last game here, we're going to talk about Cal versus Wazoo. Cal 1-point favorites, 59.5 total. That total feels like a trap because I feel like this game's going to go under. Could go over, definitely, but I feel like the under's in play here. I would love to bet Wazoo just straight up, but, man, I don't know what to expect from that team. You would think with Cal, they just gave up 60-plus points to a very good Oregon team, of course. Wazoo they barely scored at all, lost to a mediocre Stanford team. We've seen these ups and downs from this Washington State team. They've dealt with injuries. For a while, Cam Ward looked like he was, maybe he'd stick his name in for Heisman. Obviously not, but he was just having an incredible first 6 weeks of the season. Kind of fell off. Then he got a couple big games there against ASU and Oregon, and then Stanford just completely shut him down. Sacked him a bunch too. So it's tough to get behind 8-5 here because Cal is a very fantasy-friendly unit. But Cam Ward it's tough. He's GPP viable, certainly, because of the matchup, but I just don't know what to expect from him. And I'm never using Washington State running backs. I know Nakia Watson's there, but he had 2 carries against Stanford, whatever. Receiver-wise, Lincoln Victor at 5'8". He's got to be in consideration. He's healthy now, and in the game against Stanford, regardless of how incompetent the offense looked at times, he was targeted 14 times. 10 catches. It's a very Indiana Hoosier line of him. 10 catches for 56 yards. So didn't get a lot of yardage there, but was racking up the PPR work, and he's clearly Ward's favorite receiver. He was prior to the injury. Obviously, they were lining up Kyle Williams there and Josh Kelly, but once Victor came back, he's going right back to his guy. So I certainly like Victor at 5'8" and think there's a place for him in your lineup. Maybe not starting there, but that tends to be a range, that 5.2 to 6K range. That tends to be like a last man in type of salary. And I would be very, very happy to land on a player like Lincoln Victor. I know TK has him for 12 receptions, but PFF, which is more, I think is more official, had him for 10. I'd be happy, like I said, to land there with him. He is still kind of banged up, playing through injuries, but unless we see definitively that he's out, he's certainly a guy that I'll have my eye on at 5'8". He's probably more like a 7K receiver at this point. And I think Ward is good enough to torture this Cal defense. The California running back situation and wide receivers, I think they're fine. The Cougars don't scare anyone as far as their defense goes. And I'm a huge Jaden Ott fan in general, but the strange thing is I think I've used him once on a secondary slate. He's just been super priced up, and I haven't really found myself going there, but the touches are there, the carries are there. He's going to get heavy volume there at 7.5, and his various backups that he has have all been injured, which is continually meaning that he's going to get lots of work. So I think he's fine as a GPP look. And then you look at last week against Oregon, Jeremiah Hunter, 5 catches for 64 yards, 6 targets. I know he's been kind of a fantasy mainstay, but he's just been kind of ordinary the last few weeks. Tajah Davis had just 1 target, and it was actually Tron Grizel who was targeted 9 times. Only caught 4 of them for 50 yards, but interesting that he was the highly targeted receiving option there for Cal. Part of Hunter's, I don't know if it's reduction in production, kind of rhyme there, but he's been kind of down since Mendoza went up, and I don't know that that's necessarily a bad thing. It's just made their offense more dynamic. Obviously, Mendoza running a little bit, but he's also spreading out the targets a lot. And he did seemingly, up to last game, seem to favor Tajah Davis even more. Mendoza, came back down to earth, but obviously a tough Oregon defense. He couldn't get any running things going, fumbled through an interception. So look for him to have a pretty decent bounce back with everybody and their mom on the Arizona quarterback. Mendoza at 5'9" would be a pretty decent leverage GPP spot because I do think he can get back to business here against this Wazoo defense. But overall, this is one of the hammer games that, besides of Lincoln Victor, I don't find myself having too much interest in. All of the Cal receivers are very cheap, but I just don't. Even if Cal scores some points here, I feel like it's going to be a situation where Hunter catches 3 for 30, maybe he scores. Davis has 4 for 40. Grizel's got 2 for 15. Just a lot of really boring, ordinary stat lines that I don't think are going to matter too much. So I'm pretty much looking at the earlier games in this one, but I do think there's some GPP merit to using some guys from this one. So do you have your guy, man? Is your guy at this point Mendoza in your scopes, or are you kind of just, saving him for another time?
So even in the doldrums of a 10-7 Stanford win over Washington State, the one thing that Stanford could get going was quarterback, I guess, in quotation marks, quarterback Justin Lamson. 20 carries for 54 yards and a touchdown. Used him as just kind of a battering ram, said, hey, nothing's really working. We're just going to fall forward for 3 yards at a time. And that worked. That was the most successful offensive game plan in that entire game. And so Mendoza's not that guy, but he does have an ability to run and has an ability to stretch the ball down the field as well. So I think I think his skill set is well suited for what this Washington State defense defends poorly. It is kind of dicey to get away from Fafita. Maybe, you could look at a build with both of them, double pay down at quarterback, and do some spend ups elsewhere if you don't want to dive into some of the cheaper receivers that we talked about. So I'm not as high on Mendoza as I was against the USC in the USC matchup, but it is a place where fantasy goodness could be had for sure.
Definitely. All right. I do want to, before we get into course, just talk about FanDuel momentarily, about some player pool options. As I said, UCF receivers very cheap on DraftKings. They're also still cheap on FanDuel, as they always are. Kobe Hudson can be had for $6K, Javon Baker for $6.4 in that matchup against Oklahoma State. Ollie Gordon's price still reasonable on DraftKings, is 11.6 on FanDuel, by the way, and I think you still probably have to use him there. They do have the LSU Florida game. If Jaden Daniels is full go, which he probably will be, I'm back on I got to play Jaden Daniels on every slate. I know I had to take a break from that last week just because I couldn't have the salary to fit him in, and it was the Alabama matchup, so I could take that step back. But I'm back on him, even though Penix is around. Drake May and UNC is on this slate against Duke. I always love Drake May sitting there at 10-6. Duke's defense has been fairly strong, but Drake May is just the guy that I have a hard time fading on FanDuel for whatever reason. Also like his boy Hampton there at 10-2 against Duke. Going to be a little bit of a situation where I think you have to take one or the other. I don't think full fading North Carolina on this slate makes too much sense. Taj Brooks is there at 9-8, like him quite a bit. And then at the wide receiver spots, in addition to UCF, we have very cheap Jacob Cowing at 8.5. Under 10K is really nice. T. McMillan at 8.8. And then your guy on the Georgia side against Ole Miss, Ladd McConkey at 7K. That's stupid cheap on FanDuel. That's like 4.5, 5K on DraftKings basically for Ladd McConkey. So you can definitely pencil him as a FanDuel core play there. A lot of cheap receivers that'll allow you to get those expensive quarterbacks into your lineup, along with a 13K Ollie Gordon, basically. All right, on the core side here, give us a 3-man core that we can work with heading into the weekend.
So I rarely go all chalk with these, but I'm gonna challenge you to come up with some alt cores this time. I'm gonna go Fafita, Ollie Gordon, and Jacob Cowing, which is going to be an extremely chalky core. So I might have to throw a Michelle Samaj Morgan special into that lineup as well to make up for all that ownership I'm spreading out across that core.
Yeah, man, we have to have an alt lineup somewhere with him in it. That's got to happen. So for me, I'm gonna go with no quarterback core, since you got the Arizona guy in there. I'm gonna go Mekhi Hughes of Tulane. I think he's just obviously in a fantastic spot. Love him a lot. Also super high. I didn't really talk too much when you did the Texas Tech Kansas game, but Taj Brooks, to me, I know it's expensive at 7.7, but this Kansas rush defense is porous. They got murdered by Ollie Gordon. This has kind of started his ham streak that he's on. I love Taj Brooks, so he would be core number 2. I'm likely leaning towards a 4 running back build. We'll see if it ends up there. And then a wide receiver that I would love, and you mentioned Cowing as a great play, to Troy McMillan. I'll just zag there and take the other one because there's a good chance I run 3 Arizona players anyway. So at this moment, to Troy McMillan makes a lot of sense to me, and I'm prioritizing running back. So that's where I am sitting at the moment. Moving along here, we got enough time to talk prize picks and some player props. The prize picks, I know you've got some good ones, so why don't you fire them off?
So not that I'm necessarily going to take this. I want to note it because I don't think I've ever seen one this high. Ollie Gordon's rushing yards number is 149.5.
Yikes.
Like we've seen 9K Braylon Allen be at like 115. So it's just that was wild, jumped out at me. And I'm like, I'm also not like I got to slam the under on that. Like I think you might actually do it. I don't think it's one that I want to pick, but it's just wild that you can get that high. So on to ones that I do want to jump on. I think the one that jumped out at me the most initially was sticking with the Fafita theme, over 2.5 touchdowns of any kind for Noah Fafita. I think we get there pretty easily. I don't see them pounding the ball at the goal line. I see them scoring from further out due to passes. So I think we'll get there. We'll go into. They have receiving yards. I don't think they have receptions up yet. They have been lagging on getting some of those ups, but so we'll that's okay. We'll pivot to receiving yards. We'll go with Colston Loveland over 35.5. Think they'll get him involved in the passing game. Maybe some bracket coverage on Roman Wilson, open things up over the middle, get him involved early. We'll also go with Xavier White over 43.5 for Texas Tech receiving yards. And then Devin Neal in that same game, over 86.5 rushing yards. I think he'll be pretty involved and pretty explosive. The Taj Brooks one, not that I'm jumping out to take it. It's also just very high, 121.5 rushing yards on the projection for Taj Brooks. So something to keep an eye on there. They expect some very explosive running games out of a couple backfields. So yeah, those are the ones I'm on so far, and definitely once they throw the receptions props up there on PrizePicks, will be about that life too.
Definitely. So Jarquez Hunter was very good to us. He faced Vanderbilt last week, and he just obliterated his prop on DraftKings. Was one of our featured ones. So I'm looking at him going up against Arkansas. I think they're feeding him. They're featuring him. Hunter's finally having that semi breakout that a lot of us expected. 79.5 rushing yards on PrizePicks, 81.5 over on DK. So I'll just hit it on PrizePicks, the over 79.5. Feel pretty confident that he's going to be hitting that. Looking at the pass plus rushing yards, that's a stat that I've done quite well with over the last, season or two. Looking at two in particular, John Rice Plumlee, 271.5 pass plus rushing yards. We like him for running 35 to 50 yards. Got to be close to throwing 300 yards. It seems like he's going to hit that with ease. And then my old friend Garrett Green, who I've just been hyping the hell out of, 246.5 pass plus rushing yards against Oklahoma. I like him to hit the over there. We did miss his rushing yards prop, but I think he's going to get back in the winners column for us by hitting somewhere between 275 and 300 combined yards there against that Oklahoma defense that's kind of reeling lately, honestly. Feels like they're just, not the team that most people expected them to be at this point. And then I was hoping that he would have a pass rush reception touchdown, but he doesn't. You had mentioned Noah, Drake May has 2.5 against Duke. I know it's Duke, but Drake May scores 3 to 4 touchdowns each and every week. So I like his over 2.5 pass plus rush plus receiving touchdowns as well. Those are my primary ones. Now going over to DraftKings prop, I had to look at this to see, but on the anytime touchdown score, Samaj Morgan plus 22. Oh, wait, I might be first touchdown. Let me check. Oh, yeah. So anytime touchdown score, he's plus 425, which is Nick Nash territory. The first touchdown was plus 2,200, but plus 425. We haven't had any plus 400 plus in a while since week 0, and it's all been like plus 175 and minus 115. So I have to not only get a lineup with him in it, but I got to throw a little bit on the touchdown prop there at plus 425. So Samaj Morgan, no pressure, but the fate of the world is on your shoulders here. Other touchdown props that I really quite like. Let me scroll down here and just make sure I'm not giving a bad one. Taj Brooks, it's minus 185. I would have expected it to be like minus 300, honestly, against this Kansas team. That's one that if you have another bet you're really kind of fond on and you're looking to maybe just throw a parlay out there, and that'll be one that I probably feature in the prop article tomorrow, but minus 185 for anytime touchdown score, Taj Brooks. His rushing yardage prop is pretty high, as Jake said. It's the same on DraftKings. So I'll just take him to score because I think he does with all of his touches quite easily as well. And then we have a interesting one here. Let's just make sure. Oh, they don't give us. I thought they were giving us. Oh, yeah, minus 135 for Jonah Coleman. So that might be one that I just throw in there, with the parlay as well. Minus 135. If he's going to be taking over the running back reps here, he's almost a lock to score against this Colorado defense. They can't stop anybody. So he's looking like he's going to find the end zone. I like that little bit of value, minus 135, throwing that there, with the Taj Brooks anytime as well. And that's a nice little two-pick parlay that we can get and probably walk to the window with a little bit of value there with a relatively low sweat, fingers crossed. All right, that does it. We just super efficient the last couple of weeks. Love it. So that brings us to the section of the show to close us out where you pick a player. Maybe they're off the wall, maybe they're not, but you give us a stat line and see how close we can get. You've been very good with this year. We'll track it better next year so that we actually know. Too late to track it now, but I know you've been doing really well with it. So who is that week or this week's player for you that is going to have a breakout, slate-breaking type performance?
So it's not really off the wall in terms of the price and the expectation, but I think in terms of him being low owned and not necessarily being a guy that everyone is on for DFS purposes, I think it'll stand out a little bit. We are going to go with Jalen Milroe.
Ooh.
200 yards passing and also 200 yards rushing and 4 total touchdowns for Jalen Milroe.
Dang, that's a true slate-breaking performance. I am excited to hear that. I'm gonna have to get some shares. So I like that one. I think that just to throw my own in there, I think Taj Brooks. I know that's not a off the wall one either. But if we're gonna be looking at 30 plus touches for him, somewhere 25 to 30, I just feel like 150 yards is inevitable here against Kansas and multiple touchdowns. So I think Taj Brooks and Jalen Milroe could together be lower owned than they should be and possibly win you a GPP this weekend. So I am on board. Thanks very much to our special guest, Michelle. Thanks to Jake. As always, we're going to get out of here. We'll be back Saturday morning, 1 hour before lock, and then again next Thursday. And then just want to throw it out there, Thanksgiving week, obviously there won't be a show on actual Thanksgiving, but I will be doing a show the night before, moving it to Wednesday to talk about that slate, and then we'll see if Jake's schedule allows him to do that. But otherwise, everything is going as normally except for that week. Usually I do a show on Thanksgiving, but when you know it, we're going to be hosting, and I just couldn't tell my parents that are coming in to, hey, hold on, I got to go talk football. I could probably get away with it, but I won't do that to them. Thanks a lot, guys. Appreciate it, and we'll see you next time.